Hi and welcome to another ID Cyber Sessions. My name's Steve and this is Alice and we both work at ID Cyber.
Today we're speaking with Kirsty Squires. Kirsty is a data protection specialist who offers consultancy and training through her business, Clansman Consulting. Welcome Kirsty, thanks for coming in.
Good morning, thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you do? What does an average day look like for you?
Oh goodness, part of why I love what I do is because no 2 days are the same. I have been working in data protection on my own for the last 18 months, having been a local government data protection officer for the last 10 years. And part of what has kept my interest in the subject matter is that no 2 days are the same. So today I'm talking to you guys. The rest of this week I'm on leave, which is lovely. But next Monday I'm delivering training for a public sector organisation. Next Tuesday I have some training to develop. I am doing an audit for a small business on Wednesday. And that's assuming none of my clients turn around and tell me that they've got major issues and somebody's made a boo-boo and I need to go fix it. Thursday, I have the joys of looking after something called the Data Protection and Security Toolkit for an NHS partner organisation, because they have to meet a certain set of standards every year. They have to show their evidence, so that's my Thursday job. And that's part of what I enjoy about what I do. So yeah, as you said, I do training, I do consultancy, I will do everything from come in and do an audit, either virtually or physically, to talk to you about where you're at in terms of meeting your responsibilities under GDPR, right through to, would you have a look at my privacy notice and make sure it hits the mark? Huh. It really doesn't matter. I am there to help. Part of the reason I wanted to step out on my own was because working in the public sector, we work with lots of small to medium enterprises, lots of voluntary sector organisations, and lots of them were struggling with this stuff. Mm-hmm. Partly because there are lots of people out there telling them it's hard, and it really isn't. So what I wanted to do was provide a service to those organisations and anybody else that wants to work with me. I still do some work for bigger clients, bigger public sector bodies, bigger corporate clients sometimes, but most of it is the small to mediums, helping them navigate their way around this stuff and explaining to them that actually the majority of the rules in GDPR are about being a decent human being when it comes to other human beings' information.
That's a good way of looking at it, to be honest, because people do sort of overcomplicate things, don't they?
And it's understandable because the legislative framework in the UK isn't the most straightforward. We've got GDPR, which when we were a member of Europe was fairly straightforward. We then exited, we needed to bring it with us, because otherwise they wouldn't let us play ball and keep data in Europe, or people keep their data here. And that's important stuff for organisations as we all move away from good old-fashioned notepads, paper, files, filing cabinets, all that fun stuff. We need to know where we're putting it and we need to know it's safe when it's there. But in addition to that, because of the needs of the UK government moving away from, we have the Data Protection Act. It was always going to be needed to a degree, because with any EU regulation there's always what they call derogations, which is kind of areas where it's got to rub alongside our legal framework. So the DPA was there originally to do that, but it also has a number of other features. And then we've got the rules around marketing and privacy and electronic communications regs. And then we've had the last 2 and a bit years of the hokey cokey of what now won't be the new DP and DI bill because it didn't make the wash up. Oh. That said, I'm pretty sure there will be something rears its head at some point once the new administration have got their bums on their seats and figured out who's sitting in which one. So that's what you're doing now.
Yes. So how did you get to here? Why data protection?
Why data protection? Yeah, it is a good question. Why data protection? Because somebody had some faith in my ability to help people understand it. Historically, my job has always been in project management and business analysis, so fondly referred to as the why bird, which works quite nicely in data protection because we do spend a lot of time, without feeling like the Spanish Inquisition, saying, yeah, but why? Yeah, but really why? Which is, it's a big part of the job, because those rules that are set by GDPR, that set of 7 basic standards, is about being a decent human being. So just because we can sometimes doesn't necessarily mean we should. So it is my job to ask why. And because I had done that for a number of years, when somebody came and said, we need a data protection officer, a DPO, I said, but I don't do that. And they said, yeah, but you've picked up EU procurement legislation really easily. You've picked up housing legislation really easily. You've picked up all the rules around grant making really easily, and you've made it easy for people to understand. We think you could do the same here. So I kind of, a bit like lots of people in my profession, fell into it. I found myself going, okay, how does this work? But it is a fascinating area to work in, and lots of people kind of go, oh, data protection, how do you do that all day? What they forget is that behind every piece of data, there's a living, breathing human being. And that's the bit that interests me. It's helping people understand that this isn't just a collection of numbers, it's not just data, it's people. So.
And how have you seen data protection change over the last few years?
Oh goodness, so it has been a little bit of a roller coaster in the UK because we exited Europe, because we needed or wanted to make change. GDPR, however, everybody has kind of jumped up and down and said, oh, it's massive change. It really isn't. A lot of the stuff that we were doing before under the old 98 Act still exists. We've expanded on some of it, we've improved on some of it because we needed to. Because the way the world works now is different. We needed to catch up. Legislatively, we needed to catch up. We needed to be able to freely move data across Europe, across the UK, across the world, because that's the way we now live. If you'd said to somebody in 98, you'll be controlling your heating from your mobile phone, they'd have looked at you and gone, my what now? That thing lives in the car and it would give me a hernia if I tried to carry it round about with me all the time. What are you talking about? When I was a wee girl, there was a programme called Tomorrow's World, and they talked a lot about future developments. And it does feel a little bit like that, you know, but we had to catch up, because when you go through an airport now, you do have your retinas scanned. Organisations do, rightly or wrongly, make decisions to use biometrics to allow their staff on site. All these kinds of fun things. So the legislation needed to change. So while there was a lot of hoo-ha about it being more complicated and unnecessary, I disagree. We needed to catch up because there were loopholes that organisations were using to do things that they shouldn't have been doing. So what GDPR has done is firm it up. And while the new bill for the time being has gone away because it's not been caught in that wash-up, it's not one of the bills that will be pushed forward by the existing government before they pack their bags, hand in their keys and say thanks for the time, boss. Or whatever happens, they might be back, we never know. We will, I think, see legislative reform at some point, because there are elements that do need to catch up still, because although the GDPR around individuals' personal data changed, what didn't change was privacy and electronic communications. What we're still dealing with for marketing is dated 2003.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, it still makes active reference to fax machines. I'm not sure when I last saw one of those.
Pharmacies.
Yeah. So it does need to catch up, because it doesn't cover things like WhatsApp, it doesn't cover social media advertising, and all those things are currently still not properly regulated in the UK. So there are some changes that are needed. So yeah, whatever the new administration looks like after the election, I think we will see change. The point for me is focusing on where we need it rather than change for change's sake.
So you obviously see the same people, different people, you know, all the time. You must get the same question. Like the same concern. What are those main concerns that people
the
come
question
to you
I
with?
get is, how do I comply?
Right.
Because there are organisations, individuals out there who perhaps think that 100% compliance is a possible thing.
And it's just a checkbox.
Yeah. That's not how it works, because every person is different. We're not creating cookies here. This is not a society of little gingerbread people. We are all individuals with our own needs, wants, ways of using our data, companies that we choose to share it with, all that fun stuff. So the how do you comply question is the first one that I get. And there are some elements of it that we can do what our maths teachers used to talk to us about, that show our workings, be able to evidence why we made that decision, the way in which we work, why we decided it was okay to do that with that kind of information. But can we 100% comply with GDPR? No, because a lot of it is about managing risk, just like the stuff you guys do. You're there to put as much as possible in place to keep people's data safe, to keep companies' information safe. That's what I'm there to help with too, just from a slightly different angle. So a lot of it is about managing risk. So when people come and say, yeah, absolutely, or potentially saying, do you know what, from our company's perspective, that's an acceptable risk. And there are some risks we can never be fully prepared for. So that's the kind of primary question I get, is how do I comply? And that often comes from small organisations who know they have a responsibility to do this stuff, but don't understand it. So it's my job to help them understand the bits that they can fully comply with all the time, like having a privacy notice, like making sure that they've thought about what allows them to keep it, what they do with it, where they keep it, how they keep it safe, all those fun things, and making sure they don't keep it for longer than they need it. But the other elements, it is about managing risk, and it's about helping people understand that. So that's probably the most frequently asked question. And it is about helping them. GDPR gives us a set of 7 basic rules. They're called the principles. And the last one is be able to show your workings. That's not how it's written in the text before anybody says, that's not what GDPR says, it's not. But that's what it means. It's about being accountable, about being able to evidence that you know what you've got, why you've got it, what allows you to do that with it, and that you're doing everything you can to make sure it's in good condition and kept safe.
Mm-hmm. And actually, it's the 25th of May, you told me this.
Yeah.
It was GDPR's 6th birthday.
GDPR's 6th birthday, which for legislation is still relative infancy. You know, and it has seen a lot of hokey-cokey recently in the UK because of the changes that we have made in who we work with and who we don't. And yeah, but we're still learning. You know, the case we were talking about in the office earlier, there was discussion in that tribunal case about what the term behaviour means, about what the term monitoring means when it comes to this kind of stuff. And that's how legislation evolves. People challenge it. People say, no, I don't believe we are in breach. And then there's a deeper discussion goes on about what does this look like. Case law helps us develop the legislation.
I will say as well, so GDPR, for me, whenever anyone says GDPR, my first thought is, oh, it's just about BCCing people in emails rather than just like, it's kind of that. But what would you say the kind of biggest misconception is about GDPR?
I think the biggest misconception alongside the being 100% compliant is that it is too complex. It is that kind of, I can't do this. Any organisation can do this. It's not rocket science. It really is about being a decent human being, about asking yourself the question, would I be okay if somebody was doing this with my data? Would I reasonably expect them to use my information in this way? Would I expect them to carry all of that information about me? Would I have expected them to collect that much? Or are they being a data hoover, going around about sucking up stuff that they don't need? Am I in a position to make sure I keep it accurate and up to date? How do I make sure I don't keep it longer than I need it? And how do I make sure that while I've got it, I keep it safe?
All very basic questions, really.
Yes, they are. And that, what I have just given you, is the plain English version of the principles. Yeah, so it really isn't, alongside be able to show your workings, yeah? Don't give the maths teacher the answer. If the maths teacher in ICO asks the question, don't give them the answer. Give them the answer and workings out. Yeah, this is what we did. This is why. These are the decisions we made.
There's been some thought that's
exactly. Exactly. And there are some spectacularly good examples of no thought. We can do that. Let's crack on. Did you think that through? So there was a group of schools determined that they would use facial recognition technology for kids playing for sandwiches. Yeah, I pulled that face too. Because they lose their wee cards. They lose their wee preloaded swipe cards, so we'll just use their face instead.
Wow.
Now, it wasn't an enforcement case because they asked for advice. They got feedback from a complaint and they asked for advice. But what they were told was, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And if at the same time you marry that up with a group of multi-academy trust schools that were hit by a cyber attack, if they'd held 3D biometric images of those kids, I've met several young individuals between the ages of 17 and 20 that have been the victims of identity theft because so much of their information is in the public domain, is in the big wide world. You know, I remember sitting in an actual classroom doing actual training with real people rather than doing it on a screen, which is how we do a lot of stuff now. And having a conversation with a chap who, we were watching a wee video called Data to Go, which is based on the premise of how much can we find out about you online if you've liked our Facebook page in exchange for a free coffee. And you know they like to write your name on a cup. So instead of just handing it back with a name, they hand it back and say, you bank with, you're a member of X church, you go to, your kids are at, how do you know all that about me? Because we freely put it out there. But when it comes to data about kids, we need to think more carefully about it. And lots of the organisations I work with are dealing with children and young people's data as well. And that makes it more complex for them because you've got to take more care. But there was a chap at the back of the room, because we watched that one. We watched one about, it's not Jimmy Kimmel, I can't remember the guy's name, American TV host, who went out on the streets in New York and asked people to tell them their passwords.
Yes,
and they did.
Yeah.
And the guy at the back of the room said, yeah, but I mean, what can you do with somebody's passport? And I have never been more grateful for my techie guy being in the corner of the room. And he went, well, I can extract your face from that little video. I can do a nice little Google image search. And that will find me your Facebook profile. If you've given me your password openly, then it's easy for me to get in. And if you use your password for Facebook and you're the kind of person that will give it out in the street, you're probably also highly likely to use it for everything else. So then I'm into your email, I can see who you bank with, blah, blah, blah. So all this kind of stuff, we think about more as individuals. What needs to happen with GDPR is companies need to think about it too. So.
You were talking about, obviously, the bigger companies you work with, but what about the small companies or the sole traders? What would be your advice to them in terms of what you deal with on a daily basis?
So my advice is to have a look at those basic rules, to think about what allows you to use the information you've got, to consider whether or not those individuals would view that as fair, and to make sure you're explaining it to them. So have a privacy notice, and don't make it silly. Don't fill it with fluff. It's an information text. It's not a contract. You don't need a lawyer or a solicitor to write it. They can, but you don't need one. And if they're going to, they need to put the semicolons in the box and leave them at home, because it needs to be a plain English, audience appropriate explanatory text. You then need to think about, are you proposing using it in any way other than the way you said it you would, and would they reasonably expect that? Yeah, you need to think about only collecting what you need. And this is one I talk to folk about quite regularly. I get quite grumpy with companies whose online forms have a title box. Why does it matter whether I'm married or not? Why does it matter whether I've got a doctorate or not? So you know that the Miss, Mrs, Mr, Doctor, Other? I click Other, and in the box I write, please tell me why you need this. Because they don't, and because actually, I'm not Mrs Squires, that's my mother-in-law. I've never used Mrs Squires because that's not the way I work. I'm Kirsty. So when people say Mrs Squires, I go, it's my mother-in-law, why is she here? Oh, you mean me? You mean me? Okay. So, making sure you're only collecting what you actually need. Why can't we just have a box that says title / first name? Because then if I write my first name, you can be confident using it. If I write Mrs, I'm Mrs Squires, and that's all there is to it. So we need to think about making sure we only collect, use and share the minimum amount of information. So making sure we haven't got stuff we don't need. We need to think about how we keep it accurate, and that is a challenge, particularly because most of our organisations, the small businesses, the sole traders, we're tired, we're doing this stuff all day, it's Friday, it's 4:20. Well, now's not the time to send your marketing email, lovely. Wait till Monday when your brain is fresh and you've had the weekend to rest. Draft it, absolutely, but don't hit send, because the likelihood is you'll put the names in the two-line, not the blind carbon copy. But we need to think about accuracy. We need to think about how we manage that challenge and how we make sure we're only using data in the way we should. We need to think about how long we keep it. Apart from anything else, because otherwise it gets to a point you can't see the wood for the trees. You can't find what you need if you keep it all. And we should understand that what drives what we keep is either the law or the needs of the business. And that need word is the one that I underline in bold, little bit bigger font, make it stand out, because it is about need. And then, once we know all of that, and we know what we've got to have and why we've got to have it, we need to think about how we keep it safe. And that's where people like you guys come in, is helping them with that kind of stuff, That really is all they've got to think about. It's not that difficult. Yes, if they're dealing with sensitive information about people's bank details, information that's known in GDPR as special categories of information. So special categories of data is stuff like your health information, your union membership, the political allegiances that you follow, which people will be thinking about over the next couple of months, won't they? Things about your sexuality, your religion, your race, your ethnicity, all that kind of stuff falls into what's known as special categories. If you're working with that, you need to think a wee bit more carefully, because the law is quite clear that you shouldn't unless you have to. But if you're an employer, well, you have to meet your responsibilities under employment law, hold some of that information, not all of it. And again, it's back to the what do I need? Why do I need it? Well, it might be useful, isn't need. Just in case, isn't need. So yes, there are some vagaries around that kind of stuff, and if you're working with kids' data, there's some stuff that we need to think about too. But actually, ICO have got some really good guidance for small organisations, and there are lots of people like me out there who are happy to help. I'm more than happy to do. I've got 2 or 3 clients that I've met through a piece of training that I did for they're not quite a kind of governing body, but they're a support organisation associated with a governing body. And 2 or 3 of them have come to me and said, Kirsty, will you look at my privacy notice? Of course I will. It's an hour's work. It's not a problem. That's fine, we can do that. That's no problem. It's an hour's work to look at it. If it needs a complete rewrite, it might take me a wee bit longer. But yes, I can go through it. I can make sure you're meeting all the points that you need to meet. I can give you some pointers, some hints and tips. If you want me to rewrite it, then we'll need to talk more. But there's lots of people out there who, like me, who are willing to help.
We were speaking before we started recording about some recent high-profile ICO cases.
Yeah.
So we were talking about Birmingham Children's Trust,
Yeah.
we were talking about YMCA, we were talking about Circle, we were talking about Easy Life.
Yes.
What sort of lessons can we learn from cases like these?
So it is important that we try and keep an understanding of what ICO are doing in terms of enforcement action. The current Commissioner's got an interesting approach with predominantly the public sector, but we are seeing that filtering out into private sector enforcement as well, in that they have made it clear they won't issue a fine to public sector bodies unless they've done something really horrific, because they recognise the potential for very real impact on the people who they deliver services to. So most public sector bodies don't have huge reserves, money in the bank, all that kind of stuff. So if they say £500,000, which healthcare service is not running, which children's support service isn't happening, which education service isn't happening, that kind of stuff are the very real conversations. Now, he has said that as a 2-year thing. That was going to be his approach. We're coming up to the end of that 2 years, so it'll be interesting to see what he does next. But even when it's reprimands, we still need to learn from it, because you mentioned the Birmingham Children's Trust case. The Birmingham Children's Trust was we've sent the data to the wrong people. Yeah, so the report that was issued to the wrong family, but in addition to that, it contained information that shouldn't have been in that report. And the biggest bit of learning for me, because we are hearing all the time that sent it to the wrong person, blind carbon copy, gave it to the wrong, posted it to the wrong, doesn't matter how you do it, it is the most frequently reported breach. Yeah. So it is the one we all need to get our heads around, and they have put out some nice easy guidance around simple steps that organisations can do, can take. It's called the Email and Security Guidance, and it's some nice simple steps to think about in managing things like blind carbon copy, use of bog standard email for marketing purposes or for regular sending out bulk email. Yeah, but there's some really easy steps in there, like don't necessarily have autofill turned on, because we all check email addresses much more carefully if we don't have autofill turned on. But 2-minute time delay on stuff leaving your sent box, because the majority of staff that do this stuff go, oh, I did a thing immediately after they did a thing. So if they've got a 2-minute time delay, they've got time to stop that thing. Don't do these things at 4:30 in the afternoon when you're tired, when your brain is on its way out of the building. However hard you're trying to continue, you're thinking about the shopping, the dug, the kids, the whatever else. You're not focused. Do it when you've got time to focus. But the other important learning from Birmingham Children's Trust is around policies and procedures. Yeah. So for small organisations, we often, like me, I'm a sole trader, we start off and we go, do I need a policy? There's only me. Do I need a procedure? I'm the only person that does this. And then things grow and expand, and I need a person, I need 3 people, I need 5 people. And before you know it, you've got a staff of 40 and you're going, we don't have anything written down. Learn from Birmingham Children's Trust. Don't just take the best case scenario example. So they were using Social Work England's standard practices. And ICO are not arguing Social Work England standard practices. They're there. What they said was, you need to think about how this applies to your organisation. Yeah? You should be looking at bespoke procedures for how you work, because we all do things slightly differently. Which is why people come and say to me, when they come and they say, Kirsty, can you just give me your standard? No. Because the way you work will be different from the way another client works, will be different from the way somebody that hasn't spoken to me yet works. I need to understand how you work to help you put yours together. And that, policies and procedures is the kind of stuff I can help with when it comes to data protection matters, and I can give advice on how to write good ones that don't languish, sad and lonely at the back of your dusty SharePoint filing cabinet of doom, never to be looked at after days 1 to 3 when your new staff start. Because let's be honest, by the end of day 3, they all look a bit like this, don't they? Because they've done nothing but read policies and meet people. So we need to think about making sure that our policies and procedures are clear about how people do their job, are clear about things like, if you make a boo-boo, who do you have to tell? How does that work? Yeah, if you think you have created a breach issue, how do you make that happen? And that, for me, in addition to and please don't send things blind carbon copy, and please don't send things late in the afternoon, is the kind of learning from Birmingham Children's Trust. The YMCA is a email breach, so it is a sent it to the wrong, but the learning from that is that this organisation and HIV Scotland, which is a slightly older case, it's about the special groups of personal data, that health information for both of them. The email sent didn't actually contain any information about health, but the sheer fact that they were on that mailing list indicated, so inferred is the term that they use in the law, inferred special categories of data about people. So we need to remember that if you are a small organisation set up to support people with a particular medical condition, or people from a particular religious or ethnic background, all these types of special data, the stuff that you do, even if it doesn't include their special categories in the email or in the letter, you can infer it. Yeah, there was a case a number of years ago, very similar, 56 Dean Street, a sexual health clinic. The sheer fact that your name was on that list said you'd been. So it's thinking about it in that context as well, not just have I written it down as Kirsty's got X, Y and Z medical condition, but also from the fact that my organisation is sending her an email, can that be identified? Could somebody put 2 and 2 together and get 4? Yes, they reasonably could in those cases. Circle is just because you can doesn't mean you should. So Circle deployed facial recognition technology across their gyms to monitor their staff's behaviour at work. Just no. Wow. Stop it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And they were basically told, stop. It wasn't an enforcement notice, but ICO have a number of other powers, and they can tell you, stop. Pack it in. This is not okay. And that's basically what they did. It was a great big letter of behave yourselves. This is not okay. Yeah, this is not necessary or proportionate. And we need to think about those elements when we look at the new technologies that are emerging. Yeah. Yes, fine, if you work for MI6, you're likely to have your retina scanned on the way into the building. There's a good reason for that. You work for a small organisation, do they need your thumbprint, your face, any of that stuff? Just like the schools case we talked about earlier, no, they don't. Think about need. Think about proportionate use of data, because the more you've got to keep safe.
Yeah.
And the last of them that we mentioned there was Easy Life. And again, it's an interesting case because it's a marketing case and a special category inference case. So they were using target products that if you bought one of, you then got a phone call from one of their sales team to say, we see you've bought a thing to help you open jars. We think that means you've got arthritis and we can offer you X, Y and Z supplements to help with that. So targeting vulnerable members of society with targeted marketing based on their special categories of data. This stuff is not okay. And that's why when I talk to my clients, I will say things like, I play devil's advocate. I sit quite uncomfortably on the fence a lot of the time. Saying things like, how would you feel if I did that with your data, your kids' data, your grandma's data? Would that be okay with you? And when they start to squirm a wee bit in their seats and go, well, I mean, no, it wouldn't. So we're not doing that, are we? Let's think about another way to do it. That said, it isn't my job to be the Department of No. I'm not the data police. I'm here to help. I'm here to find ways that we can do the things that people want to do in a way that behaves like a decent human being, that doesn't make you squirm in your seat, doesn't make you uncomfortable. So,
because that's going to have audio audits as well. I'm not here to fail you.
Yeah.
I'm here to guide you and help
give
you
you
through
advice.
the process.
Exactly.
Rather than just, oh no, that's wrong, that's a fail. You know, it's all about guiding them.
It's about
educating.
Exactly. So that, because lots of people, when they come to me, go, I can't do this. And I get that, because, you know, my area of expertise is data protection. And I say expertise with a little e, because I don't necessarily think an expert exists in this stuff yet. Well, there's one or two I've met who are awesome, but we are not worthy. So that's a different story. But you know, that's my job. If I decided I needed staff, my area of expertise is not payroll. It's not how much tax needs to be paid. And I get that for some people, they just want somebody else to do it for them. That's okay. I'm happy to be that person. Equally, I view it as part of my job to help people understand that genuinely you don't need me all the time. You can do some of this stuff yourself. Yes, when it gets a bit more tricky, you might need somebody like me involved, but not all the time. Some of this stuff you can do by yourself. So there's a little bit of hand-holding and a little bit of education goes on as well. But I am, even for those clients who have me as their statutory data protection officer, and that's one of the bits I'm really glad the new bill's not going ahead with, because it would have done away with that, and I think that's bonkers. But that's just my personal view. Even for those who I am statutory DPO for, it's still not my job to say no. It's my job to advise, and it's their job to review my advice and say, do you know what, that sounds pretty sound, or we're quite a pro-risk organisation, we don't think this little thing that she's highlighted is a big deal, so we're going to run with that. And all I ask that they do in those cases is document it, write it down, so that if somebody asks when you're on holiday or on sabbatical or when you've moved on to another job, we're able to show our workings out as to why we made that call.
Makes sense. So when it comes to these data breaches or human error, shall we call it, is it all about who did it? No, it absolutely isn't. I'm very much of the view that what we should be looking at is what happened, not who did it. A very high profile case that we saw not so very long ago in the news, the PSNI data breach, where that spreadsheet was put into the public domain. I really hope that person's okay. They didn't set out that morning to do that. And what that enforcement action has looked at is what steps and processes should have been in place. What should have happened to make sure that didn't occur. And the sheer simple act of PDFing it would have stopped that. Now, we've all got, you know, I say we because I'm ex-public sector. Public sector organisations have got this transparency responsibility that you guys in the private sector don't have. There's this need to be able to understand, and I get that. You know, I want to know, well, why did you make a decision like that? How did you come about that route for filling potholes? That's bonkers. Why didn't you do it in the school holidays? All that kind of fun stuff, and that's what FOI is there for. But there need to be appropriate procedures in the background, and a big part of what I look at is what happened. Yes, sometimes it's rare though. Sometimes you come round to a member of staff that's gone a bit rogue, but it's really rare. Often what you come round to is a member of staff that has chosen their own adventure to some degree or another because the tech doesn't work, the process is out of date, they haven't had the training, they don't know where to find all that kind of stuff. That's not their problem, that's the organisation's problem, to make sure that their staff are supported, that they do know this is the way in which we want you to do this job. And for small organisations, as I said earlier, that's often a bit of a challenge because we grow quite quickly. And we get to a point we go, oh, there's 25 of us, what do we do now? Do we need to start writing some of this stuff down? Yes. Brutally, honestly, yes. But also talk to them. Look, this is the way we see it working. Is that how it works in practice? Because if they have put in workarounds, they've not generally, again, done it to be a pest. They've done it because they find that way easier. So we then need to look at the security around the easier route. Is that the right way to do it? Or should we be looking at, I worked with an organisation not so long ago who, while they hadn't had any data breaches, were spending inordinate amounts of time extracting information from the system they were using. The system was no longer fit for purpose. So when the boss is going, why is it taking you 4 days to give me that report? Because I had to manually extract the data, put it into a spreadsheet, create all the pivot what? So my feedback to the seniors in that organisation was, this system's not fit for purpose. If you need quarterly, monthly and weekly reporting, this system cannot do it. So you either need to manage your expectations or cough up some bucks, because this system needs replaced. It needs something that can do it. And I've spoken to the firm and they've said that's not in their, that's not in their plan for where this system's going. So if you need that, this is no longer the right bit of kit. We need to think about doing something else.
because then people don't choose their own adventure so much. They don't come up with workarounds. We all want to be able to do the best job we can, quickest, easiest, most efficient. And if most efficient is not the way you've documented it, that's where we come up with problems. That's where we get that I made a boo-boo. Oh, that thing wasn't as safe as it could have been because. But I genuinely hope that the person that put that spreadsheet and all the other big, the social worker at Birmingham's Children's Trust, I really hope they're okay. And I have met a number of people who take this stuff really personally. They take personal responsibility for it, and the majority of the time, they didn't set out to do that.
No.
It's our job to make sure that they have sufficient structure, sufficient understanding of what do these practices mean here? How does that work here? How do I make sure that doesn't happen? And yes, we need that documentation, but we also need to make sure it is not the equivalent of Michael McIntyre's Chinese 5-spice hiding in the back of the cupboard with nobody ever using it. Because policies and procedures are only as good as how much your staff understand about them.
Which actually builds on really nicely to my next question, which is basically, how do you go about building like a culture and a workforce that actually does get data protection?
So I think a big part of it for me, Rome wasn't built in a day. And we're not going to change this overnight. The next thing for me is the understanding from the organisation that when we put policies and procedures in place, we don't want them to be great lengthy leviathans full of text that doesn't make any sense to anybody. Your staff need to be able to pick them up, look at them and go, yes, I get how that applies to me, not, so what? Yeah? So what does that tell me? I've read 25. I had a role with an organisation who, when I started with them, had a 74-page acceptable use policy. And they provided this to me.
Who's reading that?
Well, I asked that question. They provided it to me in advance of starting the job because they needed me to hit the ground running, and that was all grand. And when I started, my boss asked me if I had any questions. I said, yeah, I do. Do you keep many staff? And she said, what? I said, I do this stuff. And I lost the will to live at page 10. She said, well, if you'd like to rewrite it, feel free. It was 7 by the time I'd done. Because they bolted all of the procedural stuff that the technical teams needed to understand in there. So actually there was a lot of it that was quite easy stripping out, but also thinking about how we frame our policy and procedure documents so people understand how they work for them. What does this mean for me in my job? So thinking about not expecting it to happen overnight, making sure we have got helpful policies and procedures that explain to people what we do, good quality training, which I can help with, that helps people understand. And I do lots of bespoke training for organisations. I will go and talk to them about what is it you need to get out of this, how does that work here, what systems do you use, what's your process for I made a boo-boo, how does that happen, all that, so that I can build all that in. Equally, lots of companies use online training packages, and they're okay too. Sometimes we've got to think about role-specific stuff for people who are handling the more special stuff, the more sensitive stuff. But making sure we've got training in place. And also for me, a big part of it is linking it back to the people element, which is why I use things like data to go, things like the guy asking the password questions on the street, because that's real life. It's why I talk about, albeit it's now an older case, but I think it's still incredibly relevant, the teenage child, the girl whose entire life was documented on a publicly open social media page. Location tags, she was at school, she was at Brownies, she was at the dentist, she was in That's a trafficker's dream. Don't do that. It's not okay. But sometimes taking it out of the work context and putting it into that more personal life helps people understand it. Equally, I've had conversations with, for all the world, I've had conversations with individuals who do things like housing repairs. Oh no, I don't do data, love, I do boilers. Whose boiler are you doing this morning? And they then rattle off, wee Joni, number 23, I need to ring her because she's deaf. That's all Joni's data, and before we gave you a tablet, you'd have left that on a clipboard on your dashboard while you got your tools out the back of the van. Not because you set out to put Joni's data out there in the big wide world, but it's about personalising it for your organisation, about helping them understand this is what this stuff is here. What does personal data mean? This is what this stuff is here. These are the living, breathing people that we deal with, that this information relates to. And from that, what you'll find is people get it more. Obviously putting in place the relevant security measures for whatever it is you're doing, making sure that we're not allowing people to use password 123 or any other fun Summer.
How did you know my password?
Because it's the same as it now. Is it 25.3 or 28.5 million people in the UK that are still using that? But, you know, making sure that we are putting steps in place to help them do their job in a safe and secure way, and reminding them that that laptop, that file, that USB stick, do we even do that anymore, is about people when it is. And it's not always going to be. Lots of the data our organisations hold isn't about people, but when it is, it needs to be treated with more care.
I was just thinking there, like when you were talking about that clipboard, if that was sitting in a van or whatever, would someone look at that?
Potentially.
Potentially. No. But that's the thing, I think people would be less likely to look at that than something that was essentially stored on a computer screen.
Exactly.
They'd be more likely to look at
and the reality is that that screen is likely to be on an encrypted device. So even if they do smash your van window, grab it and run, they're not getting access to that data, because we would hope it's an encrypted device. And if they're not, folks, please make sure they are. Because that's, you know, the rules around breaches. If the device you had lost or stolen was encrypted, this is not reportable. So there's a really simple step. It's a really simple step that organisations can take. If it is rendered unintelligible to the recipient, then it is not a reportable breach.
Okay.
So there you go.
Encryption, people.
Yes, encryption, and a bit more encryption. And, you know, people kind of do, well, that's all well and good now, but what about those that do still work with paper? There are steps we can take there too. The simple step of that chap having turned his clip chart over before he put it on the dashboard and locked the van stops anybody else being able to see wee Johnny's data. Yeah.
There's always a way.
Exactly, there's always a way. And that's part of what I love about my job, is no two organisations I work with are the same. Some of them are still using paper records. Some of them are still using filing cabinets. Some of them are wanting to make the step away but too nervous to do it, and need support from organisations like yours as well to help them understand the best way to keep this stuff safe. So, yeah.
All these companies storing information about us. What about the right to be forgotten? And how does that apply to, like, for instance, backups?
So there are a number of data subjects rights, most of which existed pre-GDPR. The most frequently exercised is the right of subject access, where people come and say, I want everything you've got about me. The right to erasure, or right to be forgotten, was sold as this absolute thing. It's not absolute. Yeah? If your organisation believe you have a legal or other legitimate need to keep it, then you can argue that case, and backups is a classic example. Yeah? Equally, however, the right to erasure is never absolute, because you need to keep a list of the people who've exercised the right to erasure. For exactly that reason, because if everything then falls over, so let's say your lovely colleague makes a right to erasure request, you action that, you go, do you know what, she doesn't work here anymore, we don't need to keep that data, we've passed our legal period for keeping it, the retention period, we've passed that date, so we don't have a need to keep it anymore, we'll erase it, and then everything falls over a week after you do that. If you've got an erasure list and a process that says, in the event that everything falls over, please make sure you check back with the erasure list, you can then remove any reinstated data. But to go in and tamper with your backups might render them no longer fit for purpose for the business's need. So that's the kind of route around it. But I mean, when GDPR landed, we had convicted criminals trying to exercise their right to erasure while still serving active sentence. That's just not going to happen, chaps. But there are cases where it is possible, and there are other cases where it's not. You know, there's a chap who's recently been through court asking for right to erasure with an NHS organisation. That's your medical record. You don't want to be doing that. No. You really don't want to be doing that. I know you've fallen out with that hospital, but we can't erase those records. We can't, we need to think carefully about what we do and don't ask for right to erasure. And that's a big part of what I do as well. Most of the time we only see erasure requests after a subject access request, because then they know what you've got. Yeah. They're able to look at it and say, well, why have they still got that? But if the law needs you to keep it, so if Alice made her request while she was still working here, the answer would be, Alice, without your data, we can't pay you, honey. Yeah. 6 months after she's gone, no, we still need to keep some of that information. And actually, if you offer a pension scheme to Alice, you're going to have to keep some of that information for a very, very long time, because she's not going to draw that pension for a very, very long time. And if there's something wrong, we need to be able to go back and look at the data. So it's about understanding what drives you to keep it, to then be able to know whether or not the right to erasure applies. And often people's view is it does when it doesn't. So it's a bit like people saying, I'm withdrawing my consent. except we may not be operating on the basis of your consent. There are 6 legal bases. Consent's just one of them. There's 6 things that allow us to use people's data, not just one.
That's super valuable, because I hadn't even thought about backups.
Yeah.
And thinking about if I'd restored a backup, then there could be that data.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to think about having a process in place that says, if we do a backup restore, go check that list.
Yeah.
So that you then take that information out. But also for companies that do marketing and have email lists, if somebody exercises, normally what they do is they exercise the right to object, which is absolutely stop it, don't send me any more guff. Yeah, don't send me any more marketing material, I don't want it. So if they exercise that, they often then say, and erase what you've got. So you do that, you then buy in another list. And on that list is the guy that's just said, don't do that, and get rid of it. So you need to keep a record, a suppression list, so that you can go back through that new data. And there have been a number of organisations pulled up for this under privacy and electronic communities. That and not checking the telephone preferencing list for marketing by phone. Because if they're on there, you don't do it.
No.
So they've said no already, they don't need to tell you no. So, cool.
At this stage in the interviews, we always like to ask if there's a book or a blog or a podcast or a person that you'd recommend people give a follow. Is there someone that you could recommend? Or?
Yes, there absolutely is. And he's a big part of the reason I'm doing the job that I'm doing now. Because, like me, he takes the complicated out of it. He's very good at the level of geekery that I enjoy, but he's also very good at plain English common sense, and he's a guy called Tim Turner. He does very similar to me, runs a training firm called 2040 Training, and you can find him on LinkedIn. And if nothing else, he does lots and lots of little free webinars on different breaches and different ICO enforcement action, and he's always got some cracking t-shirts and an amazing range of hats. And do you know what? Absolutely, that just makes me smile, because he just brings fun to it, and because people view what Tim and I and lots of other people out there do as a bit and the other one that I think I would probably suggest people sign up to if they want a bit of a 2-minute read, a bit of a 2-minute learning, one of the training firms that I work for do a blog, a regular kind of update on what's going on out there in data protection land, and they're all quite short, sweet, to the point, and they're called Act Now Training, and they've got a great blog as well. So there's 2 for you.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again to Kirsty for coming along today. I've learned a lot. I don't know about you, but yeah. So if you want to know what Kirsty does or what we do here at ID Cyber Solutions, you can get us at idcybersolutions.com, and we will link all of Kirsty's details, and we will see you next time.